You're listening to the Iterators of the Imperium.
Hi, I'm Miss, and I'm here with my lovely co-host Ryan, and you're listening to the last episode of Season 4 of the Iterators of the Imperium podcast, the podcast in which Ryan is the expert on Warhammer 40k, and I am the noob trying to learn about the Warhammer universe. Still the noob.
We'll get you there one day, my dude. We'll get you there one day.
I mean, there's just too much to cover, Ryan, but it's,
we're working our way through it, man. Bit by bit.
Oh, we are. Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, you take the wheel, Ryan.
Yeah. So
what do we do today?
Well, so I realized that we have covered basically everything we need to cover, but there are a lot of loose ends. For example, there are a lot of legions that we haven't actually talked about, right? That's the main part of this. There are a lot of legions we haven't talked about. And there's one kind of major event that goes on in this kind of gap that we're trying to bridge over, right? Because what we've been trying to do here is bridge the gap in knowledge between around the year 32,000 and 40,000. Because that's not a lot happens in there, because at the start of that you've got like 130 novels that are all just Horus heresy, and after it you've got like another 260 novels that are all modern day stuff, and there's little bits in the middle but not a lot, right? It's just the curse of the way Games Workshop decided to build their universe. So as it stands, we have covered all the legions that have any kind of major change in that kind of middle ground. So Thousand Sons are a perfect example, with obviously Ahriman accidentally turning a bunch of them into automatons. So you look at them in 32 and 40, there's a big difference in there. So we've covered a lot of that kind of stuff. And then you've got like Blood Angels, which, got the Black Rage and everything on them now, so that's changed what they're like and how they deal with things in the modern day. Stuff like that. So we've covered all these kind of major ones now. So what we're going to do today is we're going to tie off all these loose ends on all the other legions that don't change very much in the middle. And I'm going to take a moment later on to mention this kind of one major event that goes on in this kind of middle ground. Because it's mentioned a lot. It comes up a lot in like later storylines, but it's not like a particularly big storyline event, if you get what I mean. It's not a well elaborated on event. It's just kind of important because they talk about it a lot. So, as it stands, I think we should just get into it. You ready?
Yeah, I am.
Alright. So, what do you like? Start with the loyalists first?
Sure thing.
Okay. We'll start off with the White Scars. So, these are Jagatai Khan's boys. And so, as with most legions that we're going to mention today, if you were to, like, plot all their major events on a timeline, you would see that there's, like, a big gap between, like, the 32nd millennia and the 40th, because there aren't novels written in that gap. But the White Scars in particular do actually have a few events that go on in here, but if they're worth talking about, they're worth telling as their own story, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So, nothing that changes who they are as a people or anything like that in the grand scheme of things. There's just a few interesting stories go on here. So this is going to be the case for most of what we talk about today, where there's this big gap, but none of it changes who the Legion is, so we can just tell the story properly in future seasons. That's the idea. So, White Scar story left off after the heresy, with them following the Codex Astartes and splitting up into chapters. Pretty standard stuff. Eventually, their Primarch disappears into the Webway, chasing Dark Eldar, and is never seen again. Again, pretty standard at this point.
Yep.
In the time that followed that, they were ordered to secure the Maelstrom, since their homeworld is relatively nearby it. And that's basically what they've been doing since that time. It's basically been like 7,000 years of just watching that area of space, just fighting on because their dad's gone, fighting on as he would have, trying to do their best. That's the gist.
Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, nothing about who they are as a people has changed. That's the thing. They're still kind of, well, they're still basically space Mongolians. You know? Like, well, they are based on the Mongol hordes, you know what I mean? They're all called
Yeah,
Khan.
yeah. I
So,
just still like the way that they use real life references, for Warhammer.
some of them are
You know,
pretty good.
I mean, they are like the way they tie it into the story as a whole. I think is kind of amazing.
Yeah. Some of them are
Yeah,
quite
and
well
there's
done.
just yeah, there's just so many though. It's yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So next up, we will have the Ultramarines. You know, the boys in blue.
Yes, sir.
Honestly, same again, really. They fought on after the heresy, trying to, like, bring back order. After, obviously, or no, eventually, their Primarch is killed by Fulgrim. So
Yeah.
they just kind of try to follow in his footsteps and kind of keep doing what he would have done. So they do, like, a really good job of trying to, like, look after their realm of Ultramar and
Yeah.
try to protect the Imperium outside of that as best they can. But again, nothing really happens since, like, the War of the Beast till, like, I don't know, like, I think it's the 36th millennia is the next kind of event for them. But again, they're the same people at the start of this whole thing as they are at the end of it. You know?
Yeah.
Very structured, very organized, very straight to the point. You know? Pretty much
Yes.
ideal soldiers. That's the idea here. We have the Iron Hands. These guys are actually a funny one.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously, Iron Hands lost their Primarch, Ferrus Manus, right at the start of the heresy. And at the same time, in the same battle, lost a huge amount of their legion.
Yeah.
So they were not doing great as far as legions go. After the heresy, there's a couple of events that go on with them that we actually probably didn't mention at any point. So, firstly, they had an event called the Tempering. So, right after the heresy, they all went back to their homeworld, Medusa, and had this event called the Tempering. Basically, they all got together to discuss the future of the Legion. And they decided that no one man would ever rule their Legion again. So, they have a council that, like, runs it all now. The Iron Council. They make their decisions now. So,
Yeah.
I don't know how they would react if they somehow got their Primarch back, which would be very difficult because his head is on someone's flagship. But I don't
But
know
you never
how
know.
they.
You never know, right?
Yeah, weirder shit's happened. Like,
Exactly.
so I don't know if they'd be like, "Sorry, man, you gotta answer at the council now," or what. But yeah. And another thing is, obviously, these guys followed in Dad's footsteps, kinda in a backhanded manner. They, like the Mechanicum, believed that, like, flesh is weak and wanted to replace parts of themselves with metal.
Yeah.
Thinking that they were, like, honoring their dad and following in his ideals, when in actuality he hated having metal hands. But that's a separate issue. But at this council, they decided that the reason the heresy had occurred was not because of Horus or Lorgar or the Chaos Gods or any of that. It was because of flaws inherent in humanity. So they ended up with this, like, utter disdain for humanity and the flaws therein. So, I believe that they basically set like an overarching principle for the Legion from then on, which was to try and remove these flaws from humanity. And I'm not entirely sure by what means they intended to do that, but it sounds ominous. Nothing good comes of that. Like,
No.
There's another thing with them, actually, which is quite interesting that you should probably know about. So these guys obviously have quite close ties with the Mechanicum, because they both have this kind of belief about engineering and machines and stuff like that. And in a similar way, a lot of their stories, or a lot of their, like, information about their Primarch came originally from, like, stories told by him or by others that had heard his stories or so on. And it was just, it was like the way that information passes among the Space Wolves, which is just, telling these ancient fables, right? Like mythical tales, around a campfire type thing. It was kind of like that. These stories were passed on purely through speech, until eventually the Mechanicum decided that they were going to document them. And they became known as the Canticle of Travels, this book of all these stories about their Primarch that the Legion would take inspiration from.
Yeah.
And that's a thing. The whole Legion takes inspiration from this book, and it's like a holy relic to their Legion, right? What they don't know is that the book was obviously created by the Mechanicum, who have heavily altered it to encourage the Legion to follow the Mechanicum's, their goals, rather than the Legion's own. So in the modern day, that Legion is basically accidentally working for the Mechanicum, and they don't even know it.
That's the ultimate gaslighting, by the way.
It really is, right? Hey, did you hear the story about your dad?
Oh my god.
I know. But from that point on, this all happened right after the heresy. So after that point, they've just went on doing what Space Marines usually do, murdering evil shit. It's pretty standard stuff, and that's just how they moved forward from then on. Next up, we have the Salamanders, which oddly enough, this guy just looks like a weird Vulcan, but actually he's just a random salamander.
He looks like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle in armor.
He kind of does, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Genuinely, nothing really happens to these guys. Their Primarch keeps coming back to life and dying again, because he's immortal and just comes back every time he dies. But realistically, there is just a massive gap in their storyline between the 32nd and the 38th millennia, and basically nothing happens in there until the modern day. But they don't change who they are. They don't quite follow the rules of the Codex Astartes perfectly. They're a little bit weird about it, but Space Wolves are worse, so don't worry about it. Right? I guess it's not a big deal. We can deal with it when we get to their storylines. We can talk about it properly at the time. But honestly, they're just pretty cool dudes. They just make weapons and use them to defend people as stalwart sons of Vulcan. Pretty standard stuff. And finally, for the loyalists, we have the Raven Guard. So the Raven Guard had a rough one, since only about 3,000 of their Marines survived the first Battle of the Heresy. The whole drop site massacre thing, these guys got gutted down to 3,000. And they did survive the heresy as a whole. The Legion still existed. Then their Primarch tried to hurry up making new Marines too quickly, made a bunch of mutants, shot the mutants, and then fucked off into the Eye of Terror. So we basically just left 3,000 Marines to handle it themselves. You gotta figure it out. I'm out. Bye. Interestingly, they actually are a surprisingly good military force, considering how little of them there are. But it's because they're not a legion that was ever based around full frontal assaults. They are subterfuge. They're sneaky. That's their whole thing. They attack by night and stuff like that. Cut supply lines, that kind of thing. So the fact that they had so few numbers was never really important, So they've still been an incredibly effective fighting force, regardless of having so few numbers when this whole thing kicked off. They also split even further, because once the Codex Astartes came in, they had to go down to a chapter of 1,000. So their entire legion split into 3 chapters, and that was it.
Yep.
But yeah, incredibly useful fighting force. They have done better than some other legions, even though there's only 12 of these guys alive. Although, to be fair, in the modern day, while they still fight like that, and they still, are an incredibly effective fighting force, regardless of numbers because of the way they fight, there are a lot more of them because they've had the time to, refill their numbers. Because all they needed was time. So they have grown back up to a relative full strength over the time. And they're more effective than ever somehow. But again, they're still just sneaky bastards that'll claw you in the spine. So,
Yes.
yeah. So, that's where the traitors stand. That's where the loyalists stand.
No, I understand.
That's them going forward. Now on to the traitors. There's a very sudden jump in the artwork between loyalist and traitor.
I mean, of course.
Yeah, you'd be worried if there wasn't, wouldn't you? Go back to that age-old question. Are these really the good guys?
Can they be trusted? I think we have an episode actually called that, right?
We do.
Or something like...
The Blood Angels one. Are they even the good guys?
Oh, yeah. Are they even the good guys? Are they though? You never know.
You'll never know. So as for the traitors, the Death Guard we'll start with, because why not? So after the heresy ended, the Death Guard, led by Mortarion, now worshipping Nurgle because of his traitorous bastard first captain Typhus, basically they just went around wrecking planets in the name of, Grandpapa Nurgle. Eventually, they go to the Eye of Terror, because obviously this is during the Great Scouring, where the Loyalists are pushing corralling all of the traitors into the Eye of Terror. So eventually they do go back, but because of all the damage they had done on the way back, and what they had done during the heresy and everything, Grandpapa Nurgle decides to reward Mortarion by making him a demon primarch, or demon prince of Nurgle, infusing him with incredible demonic powers, and butterfly wings for some reason, or moth wings, sorry, for some reason. And he also puts him in control of one of his greatest demon planets. So Mortarion's just chilling on this demon world now, and he just sends out his legion to, ravage planets in the Imperium and spread Nurgle's delightful disease.
Delightful?
Delightful. It's delightful once you have it and accept Nurgle. Until such point, it's pretty terrible, but, But yeah, that's basically what Mortarion's been doing for 8,000 years, is just I think, realistically, for 8,000 years, he's been torturing his dad and playing with clocks, while his legion goes out infecting worlds with diseases only known to monkeys.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's the gist of the Death Guard. Iron Warriors. These guys somehow look even worse.
Somehow.
I'm not entirely sure. I couldn't possibly explain it, but I know it's true. So the Iron Warrior storyline kind of left off with the Iron Cage, which is obviously where Perturabo and his legion set up the big trap for Rogal Dorn, which ended with Gilliman having to come and save him. At which point Perturabo just fucks off into the Eye of Terror with all his kids. During that whole thing of Rogal Dorn throwing himself face first into a trap and dragging his legion with him, so many of Rogal Dorn's legionnaires were killed, and subsequently Ultramarines were killed when they came to reinforce Rogal Dorn, that when Perturabo escaped back into the Eye of Terror, he was rewarded by becoming a demon prince of Chaos Undivided. Because these guys don't worship one god, they worship all of them as a pantheon, like the Greek gods.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he becomes a demon prince of Chaos Undivided. And from that point on, Perturabo basically just starts chilling out, building shit and stuff like that. And he just lets his, legion handle the fighting against the Imperium and stuff. And basically they just go out into the galaxy, blow some shit up, decimate some defenses, kill some people, instill fear as a general concept. This was the case until around the 34th millennia, at which point there was a brief civil war among the Legion, and they kind of split up, and now that Legion is just scattered war bands of murderous nutcases going around the galaxy doing their own thing. Some of which will still be loyal to Perturabo, but there's a lot of random war bands of 20 Marines just dicking around.
Yeah.
Just doing their own thing. But yeah, that's basically what they do. Just general murder and destruction. But now they
Typical
hate each
Warhammer.
other a little bit. Next we have the Night Lords. So as far as the Night Lords go, can I just say space terrorists and leave it at that?
That's fine. They're fine. Yeah, I think you mentioned that in the episode as well. Previously, you called them that. It's pretty much what they do.
It's pretty much what they do, yeah, you get it. So I'll give you an actual explanation. So after Conrad Kurz was assassinated, a legionnaire called Soul Hunter just decided they were not letting this slide, so they just hunted down the assassin for ages and slaughtered them. And I mean that in the most, like, accurate sense possible. Like, gutted this bitch. Could not be clearer about that, by the way. Along the way, because a bunch of people joined them in this hunt, and along the way, their would-be new leader, the first captain who should have taken over after Kurz was gone, while fighting some Eldar, disappeared into the warp. So now the Legion is left leaderless, and there's no, like, obvious contender for who should take over. So it leads to a lot of infighting, and again, they break up into smaller war bands, all vying for power.
Yeah.
Yeah, and since then, they basically have just acted as raiding forces, so just random planet, a squad of these dudes will just rock up, burn the joint to the ground, and fuck off with a bunch of your stuff. And that's just what they do. They just turn up, wreck the joint, and leave out of nowhere, and you're just like, the fuck was that? If you survive.
If you survived, yeah.
Yeah. A few people have tried to, like, come to power and put the Legion back together under their control. So the would-be leader, the old first captain that disappeared in the war, did reappear later on, but even once he tried, the Legion was too separated. People had already, like, claimed small amounts of power for themselves and stuff as these little war bands, and they weren't willing to relinquish it. So every time someone's tried to come to power, it's been met with basically being told to fuck off by about 86 different people and a small amount of, like, internal warfare, and then everyone just goes their separate ways again.
Yeah.
So at the moment, as it stands going into the current day, they are still just all these leaderless, scattered war bands. That's basically how they ended up. We have the Word Bearers, which, honestly, they actually get better after the heresy. Like, I hate Lorgar. Lorgar is the most boring bastard in this entire thing, but his Legion gets more interesting after the heresy, I find. So, Lorgar ends up just, like, in a tower on a demon world, just chilling out, doing some research or some shit. I'm not entirely sure what Lorgar decides to do with his next 10,000 years of his life. Not very much is the answer, basically. But his Legion is now led by the Dark Council, which is a disturbingly ominous name for a bunch of people that tell you what to do. Surprisingly, though, it is a very well-structured legion as far as traitor legions go. So the Dark Council actually still controls basically the entire legion, and they still work as a legion, which is rare. The Death Guard are like the only other one that still work as a legion.
Yeah.
And all the Word Bearers do now, other than, you know, generic fighting whenever they come across something to fight, which is pretty standard for traitor stuff. Their main goal is, what they do is, they go into the Imperium, they will land on a planet, they will, like, instill the worship of chaos in some people, and cause, like, these chaos cults to pop up on random planets all over the galaxy to, like, build worship of the chaos gods. That's their whole thing. They just go around spreading worship of the chaos gods, causing these little cult uprisings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, they're sticking to the religious thing, okay? It worked for them. Well, it didn't work for them this far, but it's working for them now.
I guess so.
We have the Alpha Legion. I don't know, and
Jonas.
they don't know what they were doing for this 10,000 years.
Well,
So they're as confusing as ever. After their apparent Primarch's death at the hands of Guilliman, because Guilliman apparently killed their other Primarch, because one of them dies during the heresy, one of them gets murdered by Guilliman later on. So after Guilliman might have killed their Primarch, realistically they could both be alive. No one knows. They had to like split into these smaller war bands, but they're like smaller autonomous groups still working to the same cause. So all the other legions that split into these smaller war bands were doing it because of infighting, right? It's because they were fighting amongst themselves. The Alpha Legion did a very similar thing. They split up into these smaller groups, but not because of any internal issues. It was purely because in mass numbers, they can't hide from the Imperium within the Imperium, and they need to be inside it to do what they want to do. So they split up into much smaller groups and hid among the Imperium. That's why so they're all still working together towards like the same ends, the same goals, which is quite fun. But they're basically hiding in plain sight. Anyone could be Alfarius, for all you know. And if you ask, they'll probably say that they are. But yeah, the fact that they've had to do this really has changed nothing for the way they fight, because much like the Raven Guard, their combat power didn't really come from mass numbers in full frontal assault. It came from their particular form of strategy and subterfuge.
yeah.
But what they do now is they just go around instilling heresy and corruption on worlds, as many as possible, just like the word bearers, but not for the sake of religious reasons. They're not doing it to make people worship the Chaos Gods. They're doing it just to fuck up the Imperium.
Because why not?
Exactly, because why not? Interestingly, right, fun detail here. You know, the High Lords of Terra have declared the Alpha Legion wiped out 3 times.
I couldn't remember that, no. But, yeah.
Yeah, no, they've declared them wiped out 3 times, and every time they've been wrong.
I mean, you know.
At a certain point, just stop announcing it.
Yeah, like, double tap, make sure, you know.
Yeah, exactly. You gotta be really confident about this shit. Especially after the second time, right? Because it was like, they did it once in like the 32nd millennia, and then again in like the 33rd, and then again in like the 38th. Like,
how is it?
After the second time, stop telling people you've killed them all, because you clearly don't know how to tell if you've killed them all.
Yeah, like what is that famous saying? Fool me once, right? Shame on you. Fool me
Yeah.
twice, right? Fool me 3 times.
So there is one more Legion to mention, but I want to talk about the Legion Wars first, because, well, why not, really? But the reason is because the Legion Wars are mentioned in in my little summary for the last Legion. So I was like, I'll do Legion Wars first. I was going to do it the other way around. I was going to do all the Legions, then mention the Legion Wars, but it makes more sense to do it this way. So, the Legion Wars are an event that occurred after the Great Scouring, once all the legions were kind of pushed back to the Eye of Terror kind of area. So all the traitors are all together now in one area of space. And as you may realize, that in the Eye of Terror, there is no Imperial worlds producing resources, right? There is just demon worlds. So, the traitor legions rapidly started to run out of resources, you know, materials and slaves, for example. So they started fighting amongst themselves for slaves and materials. This is what the Legion Wars was. This was all of the traitor legions fighting amongst themselves to steal each other's shit.
Yeah.
And the worst legion for this, the ones that were like the biggest player in this war, were the Emperor's children, because they're all about excess, right? So they burnt through slaves and materials about 10 times as quickly as every other legion. Because they, like, you know what I mean? You've just gained 10 new slaves, and the captain on deck, who's like, just happens to be assessing them or something, has got a taste for human blood that day, because that's excessive, and just eats the 10 slaves. You're like, dude, we just got them. Eat the old ones. But you still need more slaves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a slippery slope once you start that shit, but that's all their legion was at this point. So they needed resources more than anyone else. So they just started a war to try and steal them from everyone else. So that's fun. This whole actual, like, huge internal war between all the traitors only ended once Abaddon formed the Black Legion, because they were now a major player who could, like, fight against the Emperor's Children. But also, as soon as he formed the Black Legion, he went and blew up Canticle City and fucked up the entire, like, structure of the Emperor's Children, and almost killed Fabius Bile, and kind of set all the Emperor's Children leaders on the run from him. So it really put a stop to their war efforts when he, like, crashed a flagship into their planet.
Yeah.
So yeah, that he put an end to that war pretty fucking quickly. Yeah. You know the whole stealing Horus's body from the Emperor, or from the Sons of Horus? That was part of the Legion Wars. It's because, again, they were raiding for resources, found the body and stole it. But they obviously found out about it because they were doing so much raiding and stuff like that, that Fabius decided he wanted the body and forced them onto it. It was a whole thing, but it was part of the Legion Wars, and putting an end to the Emperor's Children there put an end to the war. So that is something that is mentioned quite a lot, especially in the traitor storylines. Their major characters talk about it a lot, because they were all in it. And it was a lot of death and destruction and Emperor's Children being twats. So there's a lot of that. Every time someone tries to badmouth the Emperor's Children, they've always got to mention something stupid they did during the Legion Wars. Which is fair.
That's fair.
Yeah. So we come to our last legion to tie up the loose ends for.
Yes.
The World Eaters. So these are probably the most dangerous Chaos Legion, as you might imagine, because they're all insane with rage. So after the heresy, they fought their way back to the Iterators, pretty standard stuff. Now, at this point, right, on the way there, I believe, or when they get there, their kind of current situation is Angron is an insane demon at this point, and Karn, who was the second in command, is unconscious and injured.
Yeah.
Right? So this is their general state of being. They're basically leaderless at this point. Eventually, they end up in the Legion Wars and end up facing this huge army of Emperor's Children, who, quite rightly, start kicking their asses. So the World Eaters are on the ropes right from the start, because there's no one to organise them.
Yeah.
Eventually, Karn wakes up and kind of takes charge of the battle, and they start winning. They start pushing the Emperor's Children back. And then at some point along the way, Karn goes absolutely insane and starts murdering his own guys, which is kind of the last straw for this legion, and they split up into a bunch of scattered murderous warbands. So, since then, the Emperor's Children, the World Eaters have essentially just been a bunch of warbands slaughtering their way across the galaxy in random random bouts of murder. Think of them like a bunch of piranhas. They're just working their way from one side to the other, just destroying everything around it. So, in summary, the Loyalists basically just fought on trying to protect the Imperium, and not a lot changed about any of the ones we haven't mentioned. And of the traitors, the vast majority split up into scattered warbands and tried to fuck up the Imperium. And the two that didn't split up into scattered warbands stayed together as a legion and tried to fuck up the Imperium. basically slow grinding war from start to finish in this like 10,000 year gap. That's the idea I'm trying to get over to you.
And to the listeners.
Yes, to everyone.
Of course. To everyone.
I'll be honest with you, this headset is noise cancelling, so I talk way too loud when I've got this on. So my girlfriend can probably hear it from her office, like 3 rooms away as well.
I mean, that's only good. Like, if you said something wrong, then, right, if some misinformation, she would barge in the door and say, nah, Raymond.
I probably would have, yeah.
I'll correct you there.
Push the door open. Aye!
It's just another safety, you know? It's a failsafe.
So, I think that's us covered everything we need to cover to talk about the modern day.
Yeah.
We have mentioned every legion. We have mentioned the Ordos. One thing we haven't mentioned is the religious side of things, how that changed. But they basically just became more religious, and we can deal with the storyline of how they became so religious later on, because it's like an independent storyline. All you need to know is they are much more religious nowadays. That's it. Imagine. Yeah, it's, exactly, right? They're zealous freaks nowadays. But we can deal with that in the future. It doesn't restrict us in any way, shape, or form, really. No. So I guess with that, season 4 comes to a close, and we can start to look at season 5, which I should mention is going to take a bit of a different route. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to go, Mez, what do you want to talk about? And he's going to tell me, and then we'll just deep dive in that topic, but in a storytelling sense, going through the actual timeline of it as a storytelling exercise, rather than the way we've been covering it now. So it'll be much more detail, and it'll be a much more kind of fluid series of events that'll just follow one long-ass storyline that gradually progresses. Which I think will be a lot of fun. This is what I wanted to do this whole time. This is the bit I've been excited for. Oh yeah, I love this shit.
I would like to introduce something as well. I haven't told you about it, but for the viewers, listeners, everybody right now, there is many ways to contact us, and we want to introduce the segment called Suggesting to Mess, where you can suggest something if you want to hear something specifically, right? Yes. So no, it's just not me. It's a way to get both, the noob and the listeners. Not that I'm calling the listeners noobs by any means, but if there's something also specifically that they want to hear, they can suggest it, and I can
requested topics.
Requested. But Ryan, I had a cool name for it.
Oh, what is it?
Suggestions to Mez.
Suggestions to Mez. That is better. I'll give you that.
Oh, okay. It's fine. If anybody listens to this, come on. You can bring some suggestions as well. There's many ways to contact us. We pretty much keep a track on every media that we are, on, I should say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's it.
Well, there is one last thing. Do you happen to know what you would like to discuss next time?
No. I mean, you mean for the first episode, right?
Yeah.
Of season 5? No, not at the moment. At the moment, I'm more concerned about what else we could bring to maybe some of the visuals, but that might have.
I'll leave that to you. You're our visuals guy.
Yes. That's where my focus is as of the end of the season, but this is fine.
Well, as it stands, it looks like season 5 is going to be a bit of a surprise for all of us.
We're just pulling stuff out of ass at this point. No, I'm kidding. This is well thought.
Yeah. Well, would you like to round out for the last time of season 4?
Well, I sure can do. It always feels weird when you have to round out the last episode of a season.
I know, right?
Thank you guys for listening / watching. It's been me, Mez, and Ryan with the last episode of Iterators of the Imperium podcast, season 4. We would like to thank you for listening to this season, and we hope to see you in the next one. Take care and peace.
Bye.